Right, welcome everybody back to the second session of the day, and this is called Have the Arts Failed the Holocaust? In this session we're going to ask some of the difficult questions about how the Holocaust can or should be represented in various art forms, covering poetry and literature, visual art, theatre and film, and in museums. And I want to introduce, we've got a fantastically varied and an accomplished panel that I'm hoping will really get to explore all the different aspects of this particular conundrum. So I'm going to quickly introduce them all and then we'll roll from there. So first of all, on my right here is Jeremy Robson, and Jeremy is a poet whose latest collection is called Chagall's Moon. He's edited various landmark anthologies and been a key figure in poetry reading, in the poetry reading scene for many years. He also went with Ted Hughes and Danny Apps on a poetry reading tour of Israel. And as a young editor, he worked closely with David Ben-Gurion on a major history, before starting Robson Books with his wife Carol, who's also here tonight, this afternoon, publishing a very, very wide variety of authors, including Elie Wiesel, Maureen Lipman, Muhammad Ali, Spike Milligan and Jackie Mason. I know, can't believe that. And Alfred Brendel. His anecdotal memoir is called Undercover, A Poet's Life in Publishing. And then on my left over here is Flor Kent. And Flor is a Venezuelan-born doctor and sculptor. She has works in private collections and public spaces worldwide. Her Für das Kind, for the Children project in 2003 was pivotal in bringing the then relatively unknown historical subject of the Kindertransports into the public spotlight. And you may have seen her work at Liverpool Street. So if you go into the underground site, there's her incredibly moving. We'll show Flor's work when she's speaking, and I'm sure you'll recognise it. Her project also contributed greatly in the gathering and documentation of information and materials for academic study and research, and it served as subject matter for graduate studies dissertations. The project's many offshoots have been featured at the Imperial War Museum in London and the Für das Kind Museum in Vienna. And I think we also noted that one of the sculptures is also at Marc Cave's National Holocaust Museum in Nottingham as well. So there's a lovely connection there. And then on my immediate left here is Jeremy Kareken.
Kareken.
So sorry.
Like America.
I know, you said that to me, and then I can't remember how to pronounce American, so... Anyway, Jeremy is a playwright and an actor, and he was born and raised in Rochester, New York. He graduated from the University of Chicago and the Actors Studio Drama School. His plays have been produced on Broadway and throughout the US and internationally, and he's the co-author of The Lifespan of a Fact, which ran on Broadway starting in 2018 and starred Daniel Radcliffe, Cherry Jones and Bobby Cannavale. Starting this week, coming week, on February the 11th, buy your tickets now, he'll be appearing as Benny Silverman in The Value of Names by Geoffrey Sweet at the White Bear Pub Theatre in Kennington, in London. And then finally we have Marc Cave, and Marc is the director of the National Holocaust Centre and Museum in Nottingham. It's Britain's first Holocaust museum and the only one in the world founded by Christians. I really recommend you go on the website and look at the story, the origin story of the museum. It's absolutely fascinating. So having been a trustee of the museum, Marc took a 3-month sabbatical from his film business to step in and run it, and he's still running it 5 years later. He raised £5 million to renovate the site and has introduced new exhibitions, films, technologies and learning programmes. And these include the Forever Project, an AI platform that lets us talk to survivors even when they're no longer alive. And after October the 7th, there was an exhibition called a racism... Oh, sorry, not an exhibition, but a new project called a Racism Response Unit, which debunks the anti-Jewish conspiracy theories of today. His previous work in advertising, I can't not mention this, won over 200 advertising and film festival awards, including for Europe's longest-running advertising campaign, Every Little Helps. And And also, again, I recommend you look this up, is the taboo-breaking Holocaust music video, Erek, which I watched on Thursday, and Mark and I said, shall we show it? And I said no, because I will burst into tears. So that's why the only reason we're not showing it, because I'm a bit of a softie when it comes to this kind of thing. So first of all, I'm really delighted that Jeremy has agreed to read to us one of his poems. So he's going to go to the lectern and read for us. And he'll also read another poem at the end of the session. So thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you very much. The poem I'm going to read, the setting for the poem is Frankfurt and the railway station, the very large railway station of Frankfurt. I've always had very ambivalent feelings of going to Germany, but as a publisher, I eventually gave way and started going to the book fair. And this is, I found myself one night alone and sitting in a cafe, and suddenly some of the lines of this came into my head. It's never as easy as that, but in the end, it turned into, I hope, a poem. It's called Vigil. I don't accuse, am on my guard. That's all. I won't forget they tried to wipe my broken people from the earth. No, not them, of course, too young. Their fathers or their fathers' fathers. Not even them, perhaps. Be fair. They might, who knows, have been among those righteous brave who, in reaching out their hands, seal their own fate, or simply those who turned away, afraid, perhaps. Impossible to conceive the fear, the shadows of the night, the bootsteps on the stair. Now, a lifetime later, alone beneath the Bahnhof's amber lights, incessant rain machine gunning the roof's grim glass, I tell myself the hordes I watch there, fighting their way towards the waiting trains, Achtung, late for work or hurrying home, that they could not themselves have heard the shots, the muzzle cries, the dogs, the clank, clank, clank of the nightmare trucks departing on cue for their one-way journey to hell. From which of these platforms, I wonder? 1, 2, and they're looking back aghast perhaps at those black Wagnerian scenes, history to them, however obscene, that they, contrite perhaps, would wash their hands in innocence at night, not like some demented Lady Macbeth scrubbing to expunge the dead, as those accursed others should. Sins of the father, heavy on the head, be fair. And yet, it may be 85 years since that war begun, but if I, a Jew, see honor that haunted race forget, who will remember? And if none remembers, the dead are truly dead. I don't accuse. I'm on my guard. That's all. Thank you.
I'm going to just ask a question of each of the speakers in turn. So, Jeremy, reading Vigil, and we sent it out as a British Friends of Israel email this week, and I know Mark's put it on the Our Fight website, because as soon as you sent it to me, I think a week and a half ago, I thought, you know, it's extraordinary because it's so straightforward, but it's so, I understood exactly what the feeling was. And I'm, as I've said in the previous session, as a not Jew, that feeling, and I do have that in Germany, and the first time I ever went was that sense of looking at people of a grandparent's age and thinking, these are grandparents of a non-recognisable type These do not have a benign history like my own grandparents, and a feeling of secrets. Yeah. And so, but the question I wanted to ask you is whether you feel that the duty of art is of a duty to remember Jews, for Jews, and to Jews. It's something very specific.
It's a very complicated question. I remember very well the first time I went to Frankfurt. I was pretty young, and I just started working in publishing, and a colleague persuaded me to come with him and drive to Frankfurt. And we crossed the frontier into Germany as night fell. And I saw the guards standing there with their guns, and that was the first poem really I wrote about the Holocaust. It's I won't read it, it's very long, but it's also a very young poem. As for a duty, I was interested to see an interview with an Irish poet on television the other day, and he was people were saying, why aren't you writing for this side or that side? And he said, when I write for myself. And it's very much that. It might seem very selfish, but of course, as a Jew, having been brought up through the war, very young, of course, it's difficult to ignore one's background. And when we started a publishing company, my wife and I did feel a kind of duty to publish certain books, but only if they were marvelously good books. And the trouble is that it takes great writers to write great poetry. And probably most of the great writers who could have written about the Holocaust didn't survive. We published Elie Wiesel, and of course there's Primo Levi, and there's a marvelous poet called Paul Celan, who wrote afterwards, but tragically both of them committed suicide. I'm not answering your question.
No, you are answering my question, and I think particularly I was struck by something that you sent me, which was recounting an experience of reading your poem and being reluctant to read your first Holocaust poem in the presence of a Holocaust survivor. And I wonder, again, what's that dialogue?
Well, as a young editor, I found myself working on a book with David Ben-Gurion. I was very young, early 20s, and the book had been giving a lot of trouble to the publisher, but he gave it to me, he said, rewrite it. And then he said, go and get him to approve it. As a result of that, my wife and I spent our honeymoon with Ben-Gurion. I don't suppose many people here have. What I'm coming to is that in that book was a picture of an old man watching the planting of the martyrs' forest. And that sparked off a poem, and years later I was lucky enough again to go on a reading tour of Israel with Ted Hughes and Danny Absey, and reading with Israeli poets. And you're quite right. I could never bring myself to read that poem because one of the poets had been a leader of the Vilna ghetto uprising. But on the last night, Ted Hughes said, read the poem, Joe, read it. And I read it, and I was wrong not to have read it because it had a strong reaction, and that poet came up and said, thank you for reading it. So it's a very complicated thing. I sometimes wonder whether one's, not having been through the Holocaust, have you really got the right to write about it? But I think if you feel it, then you must.
And then finally, do you feel, I mean, over the decades, what's the shift that you can feel happening even before the most recent? I know you've written a fantastic poem in response to October the 7th, which people can go online and see Maureen Lipman reading that in the West London Synagogue, and it's extraordinary. It's a very kind of bold and confrontational poem, but at the same time very, very moving, obviously. But I wondered, just how... now I've lost my train of thought. What was I asking you? The shift over time. Yes, sorry. So, are you shocked by where we are now?
Yes, of course I am. Yes, very shocked, and it's difficult to believe, really. During the Six-Day War, I edited for the Israel Embassy a book of letters because thousands and thousands of people wrote to the ambassadors offering their help. I'm a nurse, can I help? I'm a doctor, can I help? I'm a chemist, can I collect drugs? We've got a farm, we could take 20 children. Another one saying, be assured that at least 95% of the population is behind Israel. Now look at it.
Yeah.
It's quite extraordinary.
And I do think there was a generation there that had a very strong affinity and at least an empathy with Israel, but also with Jews post-Holocaust, which we see reflected in our inbox at British Friends of Israel. Many of the subscribers are not Jewish, and they recount their parents or grandparents having had some kind of direct experience of the Holocaust, either going as soldiers into the camps or coming across refugees, or going to Israel themselves. And that invokes in them a very, very lasting instinct, I would say, which I think, to kind of connect things up with this morning, that somehow that gives me some hope that there's something there to resurrect. Can I move on to Flor? So Flor, if we have Flor's sculptures up behind us, so could you tell us a bit about Für das Kind and about the project as a whole and what's happened to the sculptures? And I'm really interested in the process of commissioning public statuary and what the kind of conversations are that happen behind the scenes, if you like. Just hold it. It should be on.
I think you just targeted it.
Yeah. So, how it started, by the way, unlike perhaps other countries, my country was incredible for 100 years with the Jewish people and non-Jewish people from abroad, including saving people. Anyway, I better not detract. But when I grew up, I actually grew up knowing Mengele children, Kinder children, Schindler, anything that you have seen in Hollywood, I had it in my school. This is how open was my country up to whatever we are having now, for the last 100 years at least. So when I was doing my master's in site-specific sculpture, and I go slowly because it's not just sculpture, but it's sculptures that would go to a particular site for a reason. I chose one of the subjects, which is the Kindertransport, because one of my best friends was a kinder, and it was very impressed. It made a big impression. So that's how it started. I was in the University of Arts at the time. It was called differently, Wimbledon School of Arts, and that was my project for my master's. At the time, not many people knew about the Kindertransport, and not many people, actually not even very few, even the Imperial Museum, the relationship between the station and the story was practically unknown. And so, like every artist that is in the field, you have to find a location. And I did explore many, and as Jonathan said, that memory, well, I better not digress. So anyway, this was the perfect location, Giscor. That's what he talked about, remembering. And so the first thing, before any art, I started to talk to kinder. I started to get their stories and their memories, which is a Jewish or, the quintessential memory. And it all indicated to me not only the site, that was the site, it wasn't the only place where the Kinder came, but it was very meaningful because most of the different movements ended up in Liverpool Street. It also became very clear to me that it had to be figurative because that was the most obvious reason, the way the survivors in general can relate. They cannot relate to abstract and the public. And also to be very accurate. And so I'll go exactly to the point. Instead of having a lot of bronze, I ended up collecting objects and developing a system, which is that suitcase is not just there. There is a scientific, very unique system of argon, which is a neutral gas that would not let UV light go through. So these were original objects. So in other words, instead of taking the people to the museum was taken to the people. People went and it was so obvious that that was not from today. It was alien.
How long was it in place in that form?
So, and it lasted maybe a year and a half, and I'll explain very quickly. I always got a lot of support throughout. I didn't get, thank God, I never got negativity, whether it's sponsors, organizations, and so on. And so even the station, it was all very well. The Museum of London were the curators of the inside because it needed curating the gas all the time. Talking about accuracy, to be accurate, the girl is a real girl. Everything there is real. Nobody can deny that reality. This was done during David Irving's revisionism that was against in the background, and the Nazi gold. This was the big things happening in the back of this planning. So that girl that you see, it's an actual girl. She's a granddaughter of a lady who came from a very small town in Slovakia. There were 3 sisters, the only survivors, the only Jewish children that survived of the whole town. These 3, because Nicholas Winton saved them. So I wanted to put someone real. Anybody who says didn't happen, okay, here is a girl, she's in North London, and so on and so forth. And so all these objects had a lot of research. They are all archived in the Imperial War Museum, and so on and so forth. It worked very well. It got a lot of attention. But the Museum of London, at the time, there was a crisis, financial crisis, and a lot of organizations lost funding, and so they couldn't curate it anymore.
Right.
And
so what remains? So in Liverpool Street, there's the little boy on the suitcase.
Okay, so I'll try to be very quick because I know we have 2 more. So there was a bit of a little bit of politics, which happens with a lot of public art, and some were not very transparent or honest, and this middle part is not worth to say here, but they were all displaced. Mm-hmm. The collection, happily, with my blessing, is in the Imperial War Museum, and it's the Fjordaskin collection of Kindertransport objects. The girl was totally taken, I couldn't get access and so on, until went to the best place I could have thought for it, which is the museum in Nottingham. And anyway, meantime, other commissions, actual commissions, came from Europe, and because I couldn't have access of that one, and it wasn't there, so one popped in a second casting, is in Vienna,
Yeah.
and then came this, which is, Then there is one in West Bahnhof station, and I was trying to still put back the piece because there was a lot of things going on, and people still were. I was upset, but many people were upset that the original, opened by Nicholas Winton and so on and so forth, was gone. So some years later, a miracle that the manager of the station said, incredibly, that we could place it in the meeting point of the concourse, which was from the very beginning impossible. They never would have allowed. Suddenly, out of the blue, he said, I want to give you the meeting point, put it there. And so that boy has a twin, identical twin, in West Bahnhof station in Vienna, and she's a triplet, because there is one in Nottingham, one in Vienna, and she's back in the station to the happiness of the family and a lot of kinder that came with Nicholas Winton, who were very upset. And that suitcase, by the way, which you see the original in the box, that suitcase came from Germany. All of them have incredible stories. And there is a collection of artwork by a colleague of mine also from the time, which has gone to all the camps, so many places in Europe, with all the stories of the objects.
Well, the thing that's so extraordinary, and if you go and look at the pictures yourself online and go and find the statues, is, to refer back to the previous session, it's just how concrete they are. So the fact that you say that it really does depict an actual child, I think it's almost like that does seem to be necessary, and that it's very difficult to portray children in sculpture and art without them looking kitsch or something. And you really, they don't look kitsch, and neither do they. They look kind of timeless as well, and maybe that is because they're specifically a child.
And if I can just say quickly, that boy Sam, he must be in uni now. His mother, his great grandmother, was a survivor or a kinder, because kinder are survivors too, who came in the first Kindertransport, and she was saved, only her, and she had 4 children. I forget how many, 40, 30 something. And 50 great-grandchildren. He is one of 50 great-grandchildren who is sitting there because the UK opened their doors, because people like you guys who came, Jewish and not Jewish, opened their doors and said, we want to help. And this is what I wanted to reflect here. He's there and she's there, because some people did not say it's okay. In October the 7th, I looked the other way, or even beyond Jewish history, people who see things wrong and do nothing. They did something, and they are there. And I must say that the public in general, as I feel, because I do sometimes go and do a bit of they do get the message. And I have only, maybe because it's indoors, got good coins, flowers, candles, never anything negative, on the contrary. So, to finalize.
That's exactly what I wanted to ask you about, actually, was whether you ever have a sense of the public reaction and whether you witness that. Do you mind if I move on to Jeremy?
Can I just say one line, just one line, and it's that in tune with what the first session said, that is not enough. The fight is not enough. It's not enough stone and bronze. As an artist, it's not enough. So there will be, I won't go any more into this, but we will bring a soul to that site and to the sculpture, and we are planning a project where actually people will go, schools will go and hear and exchange not only the history of the Kindertransport and Holocaust and anti-Semitism, but about their own. Why the children need to know why this is happening. What's wrong with me that I agree. Anyway, I'll let you run.
Thank you, Flor. Thank you. Now on to Jeremy number 2. So certainly, we're going to talk about the theatre and maybe film as well, but primarily theatre. So I do, at the moment, there does seem to be quite a lot of theatre in London, certainly representing the Holocaust. So I mean, even just the ones I've seen, and I'm not a huge theatre buff, but Thomas Stoppard's Leopoldstadt, Tracy Ann Oberman's Merchant of Venice, 1936. When we talk about Anne Frank, which I think probably quite a lot of people saw, but also there was Giant at the Royal Court about Roald Dahl's anti-Semitism, which is now coming to the West End in the coming months. As far as you're aware, as somebody within the theatre, who is the audience for this, and what is it that people are getting out of it? And do you think there is more of an interest than there has been, or is it just like because one play comes out like Leopoldstadt, that gives rise to a demand for others, or is there something else going on?
Well, if you're considering how well we're doing in terms of the number of plays about anti-Semitism or the Holocaust, we're doing great, Jews. Great. You're in luck. However, if you're looking at the people who are making those plays and those films, sometimes not so much. And what's wrong, what has been wrong with the arts, and in particular performance arts? Some of this, when we're talking about show business, there's a show part and there's a business part. And we got problems with both. When it comes to the show, you go to a movie, you go to a play, you buy your ticket, and then you're done. Oh, I cried. I get to go home now. I get to leave the theater. If you're a film, there's a box around it. There's closure. Oh, look at that. There's a happy ending in Schindler's List. Isn't that nice? We leave a theater. Anti-Semitism isn't over. It's still going on. It didn't end with the Holocaust. Yeah, hooray! I mean, it didn't end with the Holocaust. Like a couple of days after the Holocaust is the Kelsey pogrom. They've got, the Farhud in Iraq, the massacre in Yemen. It does not stop. It's part of a continuum. So we don't have the closure. And what's worse is you got a lot of self-righteous liberals and leftists who leave with the ticket that they spent $150 on for the Prayer for the French Republic or Leopoldstadt, and they go, hey, I was there. I had my Holocaust experience. I know better. And guess what? You don't. Yeah. So I'm just like, people now think they own it. And this is where we come to the business part of it. They own a piece of it. Guess what? You don't. I'm a Jew of mixed parentage. My father was Armenian. So I'm pretty goddamn lucky I survived the 20th century. But I'm here. We get to keep talking. That's a win. However, I don't want anybody who goes to a play or a movie to think that they've been there or get the false closure that there's a happy ending to anti-Semitism or the Holocaust. It goes on today. We saw it October 7th, and we saw the world's indifference October 8th, and the indifference of the people we thought were our friends. So, how does the theater done? They tried.
But do you think there? I mean, I have to say, there's lots of the films, including Schindler's List, that I've never watched actually, because once I watched the Shoah documentary, I thought
it's a good movie.
There's no reason. Couldn't really see or bring myself to watch any other kind of portrayals other than the Son of Saul, which I watched, which is devastating and makes you very, very angry at.
I'm going to give Zone of Interest a miss. That's one.
Yes, okay, so I did see that. So tell us, what's your objections to Zone of Interest?
To be lectured by Jonathan Glazer. That
was afterwards. What about the film itself?
Oh, by the time I could see it, he'd already made the speech, so I was done. No, thank you. Maybe I'll get a pirated copy sometime, but I'm not giving any money to that guy's pocket until he says, I'm sorry, I was wrong.
So when it comes to fictional representations, then what do you think has worked? And
doesn't it bother you that there's a Holocaust movie genre now, like a Western? This is not. I feel like I feel dirty going to them now. I think I'm through with them. I don't need to see the movie. We're living it.
Mm-hmm. But is there something? But you wouldn't say that about literature necessarily, would you? Or would you? Is there something about film and theatre that
you gotta give me a specific story during this and tell me to understand that story, but you gotta make me realize that it's still gonna go on when I leave the theater. That's what I think we are morally responsible for doing. Not packaging it and not commodifying it. And that's I don't generally write about this stuff for that reason. I haven't earned it.
But is it because, is there something there where America can't really do it? America's not really able to understand the Holocaust in this way.
I thank Steven Spielberg for the Shoah Project and for keeping the memory of survivors alive. I think that's really important. So that every day people can see how they failed and how we survived regardless.
Mm-hmm. And what about, just to come on to, I don't know how long you've been over here and whether you were aware of some of the controversies in London theatre around attempts to portray Jews. So I was reminding myself, it says the Lehman trilogy has been criticised.
I saw the Lehman trilogy. They got some things wrong, and I think they are. I love the performances. I think the way they portrayed Jews in that felt at times like a caricature. Mm-hmm. And it stings to watch our friends who've sat with us at dinner give us a less than honest portrayal of who we are and what our intentions are. Mm-hmm. So I found that difficult.
So could go into then what the theatrical world is like then. What's it like now as an actor in that, and a playwright in that world? Because a lot of actors do seem to fancy themselves as activists in the cause of anti-Zionism.
Yeah, well,
How are those dinner parties, Jeremy?
I don't go to them anymore, as a matter of fact. There are people I can't talk to anymore because I'm afraid I might hit them.
We've all been there.
We all feel it. I don't want to feel like that. I don't want to be that person. And I don't want to... You know when you're sitting with someone and they want to say something and you're saying to yourself, please don't, because when you open your mouth, you're going to sound like an absolute schmuck. And I don't want to be in a party where I have to be on biting my nails every second. So it's awful. There are a few friends who have spoken up. Those are the people I will socialize with. I have a few friends who have not. And I have a raised eyebrow around them occasionally, like, come on, well. So I don't know. I'm walking on a tightrope half the time. I think a lot of us are in our own worlds regardless, but it's probably worse in academia and theater.
Mm-hmm. And arts.
The arts, yeah, right. Academia and the arts in general, sure.
Yeah, well, that's why we wanted this session. That's the point of it, really. And then moving on to you, Marc.
Thank you for letting me rant.
You're saying what we all wanted to say for a 15 months. Marc, can you just tell us a little about the origins of the National Holocaust Centre and Museum? Because it is, I do refer people to the website for a lot more information about it, but could you just tell us a little bit about its origins?
Of course. It's the only Holocaust museum in the world founded by Christians. I think it's probably one of the only very few Holocaust garden museums, actually, in the world. So, Methodist family, not evangelical wannabe converters, really low church, wonderful, wonderful people. Used to do Holy Land tours and wound up one year at Yad Vashem. And their two sons, Stephen and James, said, there's nowhere like this in England. Maybe there should be. And Mum and Dad had this rundown farmhouse in the middle of Sherwood Forest in Nottinghamshire. And it had a Christian retreat centre sort of appended to it. And they said, Mum and Dad, how about we turn your Christian retreat centre into a Holocaust learning centre? And Mum and Dad said, sure, no problem, as you do. And they went round knocking on Holocaust survivors' doors around the country, none of whom knew them from Adam. And when they opened the place, they didn't know if any survivors would turn up at all. But the wonderful late Sir Ben Helfgott brought up a crew load of them, and they never looked back. And it is a second home for Holocaust survivors in this country. And the bond between the Smith family and those survivors drive everything that we do. And I know that all sounds very mushy and lovely. It is actually. It is mushy and it is lovely. But the soft beauty of the relationship, and that it's this garden museum and there's 1,000 white roses swaying in the breeze, each planted by survivors in memory of their lost ones. It's a bloody fantastic recipe to have some really, really tough conversations, and we do.
Well, that's what really I was so struck by. There's a lovely video on the museum's website where I think it's Stephen Smith explains the origins, and there's a few points that he made that I just thought were very, very helpful for us today. And one is he has such a strong appreciation that the world is different after the Holocaust, and that we have a pre-Holocaust world and a post-Holocaust world, and that's. Once he knew that, there's no going back. And I think for a lot of us who are not Jewish, that's kind of what it's like. You first encounter the Holocaust, and then there's no going back. And for me, it was probably watching Shoah. I watched it again over Christmas, and stunned to watch it. 20, 30 years after I first watched it. But the other thing they talk about is the need. That every individual needs to confront the Holocaust. And it's very much this sense of a kind of individual reflection, but in a way that's actually a hard reflection, not a kind of soft, meditative one. And also, and that this involves engaging in a dynamic process of understanding it, which I think is so perceptive. And I wondered, is there something about the period when they started to build it, which was late 80s, early 90s, that kind of can help explain it? Because I think it's 92 that it opened, was it?
95 it opened.
95, okay. But what they also say is that the Holocaust is not a Jewish problem, and that's because anti-Semitism is not a Jewish phenomenon. It is our problem. It's part of all our experience. But they also say that no museum can really represent the Shoah. So I wondered... I'm only sharing that with people because it was very striking, and I thought, it might help us. So I just wondered what your experience has been of the struggle that might be involved in staying true to that over time, and sort of avoiding the generalisation that we talked about in the first session, where it becomes about refugees, it becomes about tolerance, it becomes about hatred, it becomes about bullying, and the specificity is lost.
Well, at the risk of sounding heretical, I'm kind of with Jeremy. That what you said about movies and theatre, and I do think it extends to literature and every other art form as well, lets present-day anti-Jewish racism off the hook. The massive failing of Holocaust education has been to make people think it's a one-off that never happened before and could never happen again. So I take issue with, there's pre- and post-Holocaust. The Holocaust is the middle chapter of an ongoing story. And it is sickening that self-congratulatory virtual signalers can get their hanky out on Holocaust Memorial Day, and I'm talking about leaders of countries downwards, and do bugger all about living Jews. They're very happy, very, very happy to mourn dead Jews.
Except drag them out of the theatre.
Yeah, Jeremy says, but the only thing to do with living Jews is drag them out of the theatre in Soho Theatre. So
You're talking about the comedian.
Soho Theatre.
President Higgins.
Yes, in Ireland, yeah.
So I think we have a really big job to do to reconnect this middle chapter, both to its preceding chapters and to the ones being written now. So for me, it is all about starting with today, not telling history, not doing stuff which is right rationally, but emotionally just doesn't connect to an audience today. Mm-hmm. Start with the problems today, and then peel off the layers of the onion and make your lefty, progressive, liberal person on one of those marches realize they have more in common with Nazis than they realized, because they believe exactly the same things.
And just before we go out to the floor, do you think that it seems to me a big problem in that we've sort of allowed ourselves to leap to educating the children and missed out 2 generations in the middle, and we somehow think that this is something that can help improve children or socialise children better, but actually what we end up doing is completely dumbing down the Holocaust and making it generic.
Absolutely,
because we have to make it in a way that Because we can't tell children about the Holocaust in its true horror, can we?
Well, I'll answer that bit in a minute, but you're dead right about the adults. And that's why we formed that thing you mentioned, the Racism Response Unit. And we didn't do it as a response to October 7. We'd already been piloting it. We began piloting it. So this is a unit which teaches the teachers, but also union leaders and council leaders and, well, I'd like to say people in university academe, but it's hard to get to them. But we do have a bit of success. And the point there is the Racism Response Unit.
And why have you called it racism?
Because that word anti-Semitism is not understood by 52% of British people. And the other 48% know exactly what it is, but rarefy and say, it's not really racism, it's just this other kind of arcane academic thing, don't worry about it. It's a racism. And all of the slurs on Jews today are ethnic. They're not religious. There's nothing to do about killing Jesus. There's the odd blood libel when you see Bibi being demonized with, being a blood buddy, but it's an ethnic slur. So in the age where racism is the cardinal sin, this is one of those guys, so you should care about it. So we call it anti-Jewish racism. So it's if you have your kids going into a school and being taught all the good stuff, but the teachers themselves are part of the problem, you've got to attack that problem. So we do that. Kids are way better than adults at this stuff. So Flor's wonderful cast is up at the museum is like a prologue to an exhibition called The Journey we have. And it was invented by Stephen Smith in response to primary schools saying, you've got a great Holocaust exhibition for adults and for secondary schools, but what about primary school kids? So it's meant to be a softer version. It tells the story of a boy called Leo who goes through, you literally follow through him through a series of room sets, trying on his clothes, discovering testimony, all sorts of stuff. It's very, very experiential as you walk both his physical and metaphorical journey from happy childhood in German Jewish Berlin in 1938 through to being ostracized, picked on, then Kristallnacht, and then the final room set is he's put on a train on the Kindertransport to a new life in England. And that's kind of the end of the beginning, because then there's questions raised about what's it like to have to go to a new country, leave your family behind, etc., etc. Now, right now, that exhibition is way, way more potent for both the kids and for the adults because they can relate to it. People cannot relate to the guys in jackboots and the death camps. It's porn. Yeah. And back to Jeremy's point, I absolutely cringe every time there's a new best-selling The Something of Auschwitz. It's gross and it's irresponsible and it is all about the business. So we've got to get into the ordinary people, the other side of the coin, the perpetrators, not just about victimhood, Jewish victimhood. Why do ordinary people do this stuff? Evil is inherent within all of us. It's like cancer. It's a gene just waiting to be exposed. So it's about solutions, and the solutions start with looking at ordinary people, not at the maniacs once it gets to step 10. It's step 2 and 3. We're probably on step 3 towards the next Jewish genocide. The next dictator will be the algorithm. And we're already on the way. So just focusing on the extreme conclusion of that, it's too late by then. So this exhibition, The Journey, which shows how day by day people are othered and ostracized, and how there was an opportunity for their non-Jewish friends to stand up, because at that point it's not too extreme. That's the point, and that's where we are today.
So many of those terms have become... othering it used to, I think, probably mean something, but now it just means this is incredibly flabby, and all kind of, sick formers will use the term othering. Same with scapegoating, whereas it kind of used to mean something when we talked about not the rise of Nazism. And now it means what the Daily Mail might say, or Katie Hopkins. It's like so many of much of the language has become rendered incredibly banal and not very useful.
No, it doesn't stop it being true. You can be othered for being a goth or for being trans or whatever. It doesn't mean it's not true. I think that the challenge is to kind of forensically isolate each of these problems. We know absolutely at the Holocaust Museum nothing about trans stuff. It's a different issue with different causes and different problems and different, whatever. I think the thing with anti-Jewish racism, which makes it different from all other racisms, is it's the only one that punches up, not down. Most forms of racism are, you're not as good as us, go back to where you come from, you're not worthy of being in our neighborhood. This racism says, they're very clever. They control us all. It's punching up. So it is different to every other race. Literally, it is different. And therefore, you have to study the causes of it and the phenomenon of it, because it literally is a different thing. So it's not a question of being, ours is worse than your, we've got more of a case than you. It's just, you're not going to learn anything by saying, all hate's bad, don't hate. You have to be specific, otherwise there are no specific solutions.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, let's come out. Hands up. Okay, yes, there's a chap here, Casper, with his hand up.
Thank you. The question I have is around activating people who've experienced the museum or the art or poetry, whatever. What is the way to activate, in your experience, people to step forward? I'd like to help, I'd like to do something.
Speak up a little bit more.
The way to activate, my question is, of the panel, how in their experience and their knowledge, what's working these days?
Anything? Yeah?
Yes, you line with that?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
By emotion. The Jewish community is ridiculously obsessed with facts and logic, and they don't work. There needs to be a suspension fluid, and that's called emotion. Moving images need to move. Art needs to move. But I'd suggest that right now, by provoking, by putting someone off their guard slightly, by having finished watching that movie or play or whatever it might be, or exhibition, and come out knowing less, not more, by being a little bit less certain of your prejudices. So I think it's like a bit of a jolt, a bit of a thump, just to make people a little bit less certain.
Jeremy, what do you think? I mean, what is it? What does work in increasing people's ability to empathise or to understand? How do you draw through either the emotion or presumably in poetry is all about the emotion and the resonance. So what do you aim for when you're trying to make a powerful poem about this?
You're right. I mean, it starts with education. It starts with education and it finishes with education. And if you can get children at a young age to read the right books, I don't know what other solution there is. I think I'm not sure the Jewish press helps very much. I shouldn't say this, but I mean, for many years, when you write a poem on a Jewish theme, where do you publish it? You can't publish it in a national newspaper. The normal poetry magazines that I would normally publish in won't publish something as controversial as that. And then you have the Jewish Chronicle, where the previous editor always welcomed and invited me to write poems, and the new editor says, it's not the place of poetry, won't publish anybody's poems. So, luckily, I have you, or my own books. But apart from that, it's very difficult. I can't see any other solution except education and shouting very loudly when you have to, or, as you say, punching someone.
Says the poet. Jeremy.
It's art that encourages or creates an action, I think, is propaganda. I sometimes do propaganda. I did something for the Ministry of the Diaspora the other day, and I think propaganda is important. I don't often do it, but I think you have to recognize it. It's necessary that we have to appeal to their hearts, not their heads. There's that old saying that the anti-Semite does not accuse the Jew of theft because he thinks he's a thief. It amuses him for the Jew to turn out his pockets. So the facts are not really particularly relevant to them. So they have to, the anti-Semites among us, the racists, the anti-Jewish racists, they need to be shunned. They need to be shunned, and we need to create a world where that kind of attitude is shunned. And I'm not sure I know how to do it. I'm not sure you should trust me with that kind of power if I did. But I know that's the goal, because anti-social, anti-liberal, anti-enlightenment people should not be welcome in our society, in our polite society at least.
I'm sure a lot of us here sometimes wanted to throw a sofa at the television when you get the news, but it was heartening this morning just watching the BBC and seeing the President of Israel being interviewed by Laura Thing, and he would have none of it. He said, first of all, the BBC is biased. Don't talk to me about torturing prisoners in prison in Israel. We don't. We're a democracy. You can't believe a word they're saying. Don't talk to me about genocide. I won't have it. I simply won't have it. And she couldn't get a word in, and it was wonderful.
Good for him.
That's the problem when we all give up on the BBC, and then sometimes their coverage of the hostage transfer yesterday was that it was the top news item, the condition of the hostages, which, coming back to humiliation and lies and making Jews tell lies, that was absolutely at the heart of those rituals. I mean, just absolutely sick-makingly disgusting. Flor, on this question of passion and emotion.
We got emotion, and we got education. We got expulsion out. I would say, yeah. I would say another E, exposure, which means we all can do something. Whether even if it's bad theater, bad art, good art, bad poems, good poems, bad books, we have to expose, because that's what Smith. He was exposed and it inspired him. I was exposed, it inspired me. And again, this is my next, not only material, but exposing people to talk, exposing the viewer to hear people, exposing any exposure. I'm sure all of you were at some point, even the gentleman here, when he was exposed to something and he said, oh my God. So I don't mind, put anything, just keep talking. There is a saying, and I'll finish with this, by Jean Baudrillard. He was a philosopher, French philosopher, and he says, forgetting extermination is extermination. So I won't forget, good, bad, just keep talking, keep the narrative, and expose people to this history and to the problem, because it will help with their own problems in their own way, whether it's the girls, victims in Rotterdam, or the people in Iran who are suffering, or whoever. It does help be exposing them. That's my all E.
Yes. There's a question down the front. Hi, Fionn.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention something you said about evil and evil being inside all of us. And this idea that things are evil is sometimes, I think, the problem, because what you were talking about being able to watch a film and then you're thinking, oh, isn't it terrible? But at least those were evil people, and therefore, and it just sort of stops you short of actually trying to understand what happened, which was bigger than the individual. And I think that the thing with the arts is that you do start with the individual. You know, you were talking about writing poetry, and you write it because that's what you're feeling, and it's important to stay true to that. So I just think that's something that people grapple with in the arts a lot, is that to connect with people. I mean, every kind of film or television program is looking for the single human story that can illustrate something broader, but that's how you connect with people, that's how you move them and create an emotional response. But actually what it does is sometimes stop you from having to think. And maybe that's, you know, I mean, educating people as to what happened is one thing, but educating them and to try and make an effort, telling them that they need to make an effort to try and figure this out and talk to each other about that too, is something that the arts struggles with, I think. I just wondered what you thought.
But we also have to be prepared to let people feel extremely uncomfortable and extremely upset, and to be very, very disturbed by what they're exposed to. And that's obviously very unfashionable at the moment, because there's usually a trigger warning. And so actually really understanding that moral depth comes from confronting, as Stephen Smith said, confronting.
Art should comfort. I think art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. I can't remember if that's right or not. But.
Well, and we can see the problem, can't we, when we try to sort of smooth it over and skip. We try and pull the moral lesson out of the Holocaust at children's level, but we don't. We're actually too afraid to really delve into it because of the scale and the enormity and the cruelty and just the worst. That it is the worst that humanity has done. Let's just come to Daniel over here. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it follows on from what you've just said, because I think, I mean, you do some excellent work, Marc. We met recently at your exhibition.
Daniel, do you mind just...
Yeah, but I think relevance is a huge problem here, because the example you gave of a boy in Frankfurt, you know, the German Jewish community was quite prosperous, quite secular, escaping from the Holocaust to go to over the Kindertransport. Obviously, that can happen, but that is hugely untypical. And that's a problem when you try to make things relevant, because most victims of the Holocaust were religious Jews. Most of them lived in relative poverty in Eastern Europe, in what is now Poland, the Ukraine, Russia. And their experience of the Holocaust was one of complete, arbitrary, sheer terror. And you cannot make that relevant in the sense you're talking about, I think, to 5, 6, 7-year-olds. It's just not possible. And I think why so much of the most popular Holocaust literature is so disgusting to me is that it usually has a kind of central figure of a good Christian who's trying to save the Jews, and that is the kind of ultimate outcome of the story. This good Christian saves the Jews. And of course, if that happens in real life, then that's great. But that was completely untypical. The reality was sheer, unadulterated terror, mass murder, and most Holocaust literature really skews the reality horribly, often for very good reasons, for trying to be relevant.
That's what, when I watched the show again, the thing that really I was really left with was the fact that the survivor's story is not the story. And it captures it brilliantly in the documentary, because there's a point, I think, towards the end where one of the survivors says exactly that. You know, he actually went into the gas chamber because at one point he wanted to die, and his job, he still had a role at that point and he decided he could not tolerate it any longer, and he went into the gas chamber with the latest group of Jews, and one of the women inside said no and sent him out again. and when you grasp the enormity of the number in that documentary, and realising the tiny, tiny fragment that is the survivor story. But of course, how do you tell the story of the dead, of the people that went into the chamber and didn't come out the other side, other than as ash? How do we tell that story? How do you tell the story of the dead, which is what you're addressing, Jeremy? Sorry to...
I think now's the wrong time. I'm sorry if it sounds heretical. There is no story we can tell about the Holocaust right now. There's a wonderful and very, very important job to be done, and plenty of museums and archivists are still doing it. So if I take the Auschwitz Museum, every single day on X, formerly known as Twitter, they post another victim, name, background, story. And every day, it's a chain, an unbreakable chain that is undeniable. So in 1,000 years, 50,000 years' time, whatever, it is an undeniable fact. The Holocaust happened. And the world, has to keep doing that. But there are plenty of people like them doing that. The Shoah Foundation's 50,000 testimonies, our 300 testimonies, our interactive testimony, you can speak to Holocaust. But right now, the job is, can I mention Karen Garfen? Karen, stand up, Karen, if you don't mind. Karen is an artist. And it is much more important to tell Karen's story. Karen is a brilliantly talented artist, and she has been cancelled for being Jewish. She did a wonderful exhibition, and she's doing it in her own home, which I had the privilege to go and see. We should be telling stories about Karen now.
Do you want to tell yours? Do you want to have the microphone?
Yeah, I think we really do need to tell this story. And I just feel like when you're cancelled, you can either go down, you know, just not accept it, or you can stand up and be counted, which is what I do. I just, from being despair of having my work not selected for an exhibition, and my family said, this work will never get in, it's not going to get in. And it was actually, I hand-stitched the names of all the women, from babies up to adults, who were murdered on the 7th of October. And it was a very moving piece. It doesn't tell you anything other than their names. A lot of my other work is memorialising people. So I say their name, their age, what they did for a living, if they were married, where they were murdered. But this piece, I thought, well, nobody was really interested in these women who were raped, the most devastating things happened to them. So I thought, well, I'm not going to give you any information because you don't really care. And the Me Too people, you know, they weren't interested in Israeli Jewish women who were devastatingly murdered. I mean, it was the most shocking thing. So even for me, it was the hardest thing doing that research, and all my work is research-based. And so I just did hashtags, and the hashtags were words that I found on social media, which were devastating. And incredibly, I've had, you know, people have come to see this exhibition, and they're silenced by this piece, which actually is called Silence, because there was a silence after 7th of October. So when people come and they're silenced, or some have said, I didn't know about this, I didn't understand it. And then others say this needs to be shown. And when you know it hasn't been shown, even though it really needs to be shown, it's devastating. But I decided this is not the end for me. When my work was, when I was sort of cancelled, I decided to set up this exhibition in my own home studio, and it's been a success. I've had people whose fathers were on the Kindertransport, incredible stories. And it's amazing when they actually say, you know, how many more books, how many more stories, how many more films, what else is there to say? And when they say, you have added a new thread to this, coming from people who have had a lived experience of their fathers who went through hell. So that's really, you know, touches my heart. And so I did that. I did the exhibition, and then I applied for this thing and that thing, and I have work actually in, where is it now? In Poland, which has gone out to Poland, and that's actually just 12 small pieces. It's from a miniature exhibition. It's all hand-stitched, tiny detailed stitch. And it's in Poland, and it's about one of the kibbutzim, and the exhibition is called Community, and mine is called Communities Lost. So it's a joy when something like that is accepted. And finally, I have work has been accepted for an exhibition in Australia, and it's touring around Australia for a year and a half. And it's none of the exhibitions my work are in are about the Holocaust. They're not about Jewish subject matters, but they have been accepted for a lot of exhibitions overseas. So that's heartwarming. And this piece is actually about global anti-Semitism since the 7th of October. So to have that out there, travelling around Australia, which has a very high level of anti-Semitism, as we've said before about synagogues being attacked and burnt and graffiti, I feel like somebody said that we all, yes, you said, Flor, you said how important it was to do one thing. If we could just do something, and also Jeremy said something about he has this need, he has to do it. And that's exactly how I feel. So I really connect to you speakers. I think you're all incredible, and this is the most amazing opportunity for us to talk and to listen and to understand. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you. Could you...
Hi, is this on? Yes. I just wanted to say that the University of the Arts London is part of London University, and Jewish artists are being cancelled. Specifically, I know of one artist whose dissertation has almost been destroyed by the academics, the so-called academics in the universities. And so I think there's a very big role for people to play there to try and expose the lecturers, the tutors and so on to what's going on. The other thing that's happening is that Jewish filmmakers or people who are showing films are finding it almost impossible to find cinemas that will house their films. And the third thing is that those of us who do make material to show, most of it gets shown in synagogues to Jewish audiences, to the converted. And it's very rare that it gets out, like a Flor's exhibition or your museum, that it actually gets out to the public. It's a little bit like the poetry, that who's listening to it. And so there's a lot of work to be done to get that exposure.
Thank you. And just if people do have stories of cancellation, then my other hat is I work at the Free Speech Union. And that's what we do. we protect people's rights and we uncancel them as much as we possibly can. But I'm very interested in those stories. I suspect that security will be raised as the issue, controversy, being non-political, all of that kind of stuff will be the thing that's coming through, and it's very familiar. Should we go out and take some more? Yeah. Okay.
Karen,
who are you pointing to me now? Which Karen? Who's Karen?
Oh,
hello. Yes. Thank you.
Hi, because we haven't really addressed visual arts, and I couldn't agree more with the person in front. I know personally of a huge amount of ghosting that's been going on in the visual arts, and the problem is it is not just artists, it's deep. Curators who are signing boycotts. So artists, Jewish artists and curators, younger Jewish artists and curators who are trying to make their way in this industry are quiet. They have to be silent. So I feel it's the generation before that have to sort of scream and shout. I just wanted to add that Jonathan Glazer, I don't know if he still is, but he was a trustee of the Wiener Library. Now, I mean, that's just unbelievable. And when I went to Giant, I was sitting in the matinee, and during the interval, a couple behind me started going on about how terrible what's going on in Gaza. So, I mean, is it working? So my question to you guys is, how can we make Holocaust memorials like the one that's going to be built, if it is, in Westminster, actually relevant to contemporary anti-Semitism? And I think your exhibition, I haven't been, my kids have been to Marc's exhibition, is fantastic because that sort of links it, but it has to be shown widely, and that is the problem. And one final thing, I know a young teacher who is in a Central London Comprehensive and was, she had a problem, and she went to her head and said, look, they're saying it's a genocide in Gaza, and the history teacher said, look, of course we can't say that, but of course it is. So,
Okay, I'll take one more question. No, I'm not coming to you again. There's so many other hands.
Can we stop calling them Holocaust memorials? Again, this is not something that's in the rearview mirror yet. I don't know. Commemorators, it's not something that we should remember because it's still going on.
Unfinished business.
Yeah.
Unfinished business.
Exactly.
I can't see. Is any hands over this side up towards the back that I haven't taken? No? Okay. That's okay, we can cut you out, apart from your voice, in a non-spooky kind of way.
Okay. I've just seen some wonderful videos that they were parodies. And we as Israeli were very good.
Just hold the microphone right to your mouth.
We are very good at self-deprecating. And I think that humor and parodies and caricatures in different forms or animations, animated movies, it's a wonderful form to get to a wider audience. Now, another thing, I just want to comment to the gentleman that asked what we can do. So to those that are active in social media, I saw at the beginning of the war an interview with a team of young guys in Israel that they are in the high-tech industry. And what they were saying, that what they were doing, and they were doing it in shifts, you know, and completely voluntarily, to tackle the anti-Semitism and all the hatred on the social media, what they were doing, they were answering to comments, they were commenting on comments of big, huge people with loads of followers. So then other people that are following, people with millions of followers, for example, when they are commenting on people that are commenting to them, then it triggers other people to comment on their comments. And then it generates a discussion, and then they are increasing in this way their following, and it triggers more curiosity and to understand more and to ask more questions and to learn about the war, the topic, the anti-Semitism, the hatred, what's going on at the moment.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to say that, you know, if people that are active on social media, they can adopt this strategy.
Well, it's interesting that we have, I mean, it's been quite nice to have a day and not talk about social media, because normally everybody wants to blame it for everything to start with. So, but it's good to introduce it and as a kind of point of what might be done. Okay, I'm going to come back along the panel to, not necessarily in the right order, because we want to end up with Jeremy, because Jeremy's going to read another poem at the end to finish us off and take us into the next session. Karen, what's your surname?
Garfen. I'm not on commission.
She's thoroughly outed now anyway. Okay, I'm going to start with Flor. Flor, do you want to sort of pick up on some of the questions? And this is our last kind of round. Anything you want to particularly pick up on? I mean, do you have... are there any stories or concerns you have about the kind of cancellation of people, or the difficulty of raising the current questions, as you know, as Marc's kind of directed us towards, which is how to making it relevant in not in the cliched sense, but actually talking about anti-Semitism now as the only point really of going back and drawing through the continuities with the Holocaust.
Well, I will share a very tiny observation. So my daughter wrote a book which she's trying to publish, which is a journey on itself. And interestingly, horribly, surprisingly, one of the publishing companies, her book is fiction, nothing to do with a documentary or anything. But this publishing company wrote back to her and said, oh, we apologize. We don't take books unless are LBQT, Holocaust, anything from the Holocaust that has a black African, a black person in the actual Holocaust story, which I thought, oh my God, you know, how would a person like that would end up in Auschwitz? I don't know. But this is not even cancellation. There is no door. You never even got in. It's incredible. So that is beyond cancellation. But it's also not even anti-Semitism. It's the times we are living, and things change anyway. But I wanted to share that. And regarding his comment about the theater and all of that, and business, show business. Is it show? Is it business? But it's important to be exposed. It's important to go to Auschwitz. But there is a huge disappointment when you go to Auschwitz and you see the tourist autopullmans that says thermal Krakow, Auschwitz, thermal bath. I mean, oh my God, you want to run for your life when you see that. You say, what am I doing here? This is Disney. Anyway, things to think. But yes. Anything we do helps for not only us, not only the Jewish people. I think civilization. This is about the future of civilization all over the planet. All over the planet. That's what I feel.
Thank you, Flor. When we see crass Holocaust memorialisation, we reach for our revolver. Is that what we should say? Jeremy.
Yeah, I just also wanted to say, if you're worried about cancelization, don't, because it's like that old Groucho Marx saw, I don't want to be a member, I don't want to be in a club that would have me as a member. If any organization that would cancel me, I would shoot myself before I'd want to be part of you. And that's freeing for and then now you don't have to shut up anymore. You don't have to get the good opinion of the wise, bien pensants anymore. You get to say what's on your heart, in your soul. So cancellation in that regard can be a blessing. So don't let the bastards keep you down. Go out there and be brave.
Just they cancel you here, go somewhere. There are millions of doors. And things change. Everything changes.
Thank you. Marc?
I agree, things do change. It's a big thing to raise now, but maybe it's a segue to chat in the bar or whatever. Karen was talking about cancellation in the arts, and it's not just the curators, as we know, and the artists. It's also the philanthropists and the givers. And there's one magnificent woman called Candida Gertler, who, having made the careers of, and Karen will know better than me, made the careers of lots of young artists, has been treated absolutely abominably. Now, the point of this story is that in walking away from the art scene, she wrote a letter that was absolutely scathing. And what it does is shift the focus more onto the false prophets who say that getting rid of Jews is a good thing and Jewish art, and their idiot followers. And that is the thought I'd like to leave everybody with. The way to win this war is to focus on the perpetrators. Jewish victimhood will never, ever work, particularly right now when people think, well, you're white and you have white privilege. Yeah, we've had the privilege of being persecuted for 2,000 years. Oh, you should have the privilege. It's
white for 5 years.
Stay in England longer, you'll become even paler.
And the exhibition that Karen mentioned that we had called The Vicious Circle, it connects to brown Jews, Jews of color, but more than anything else, it connects to the idiocy, the fantasy, the delusion behind the nebuchs, because that's what they are, who basically carry out this murder and violence because they have nothing in their lives. That is why they are monomaniacs. They have to make sense of the world and their failure. And if we only shifted the focus onto them, because they create a problem for all of us, it might be trivial. You want to go shopping at Selfridges on Saturday afternoon, you can't because, all these blooming marches in the way. It's just, but it's one tiny, tiny little step towards how these people ruin and pollute the environment for all of us. If we stop talking about us and the what of the Holocaust, and even the what of present-day anti-Jewish racism, and focused on the why and the perpetrators, we'd be a lot further forward, because everyone would then have an incentive to do something about it, because they drag all of us down in civilization.
Thank you. Which is a call to arms to do to Sally Rooney what was been done to J.K. Rowling, I would say. I'll start that campaign. Okay, and now I'm going to ask Jeremy. Absolutely, yeah. So you were going to read Another Place. Is that the one you're going to read? Yeah.
Yes.
We're going to close with Jeremy.
I was thinking, if I said, which poet from the First World War do you know? And you'll all say Wilfred Owen. But how many will say Isaac Rosenberg? Because he was considered by one or two critics to be the greatest poet of the First World War, but he was a private, he wasn't an officer, and the British literary establishment is very, very snooty and snobbish. It's totally unrelated to anything we've been talking about.
And enriching for that.
Would you like me to hold the microphone?
Pardon?
Do you need two hands?
Well, if this is short, I can probably manage.
Okay.
Shall I hold it?
Would you mind? Thank you very much.
Sorry,
Good
but we need to finish on time. Yeah. Okay, sorry to be rude. Yeah. We're going to finish, but by all means, have a chat in the break.
This is the poem sparked off by watching an old man planting the martyrs forest. The poet in Israel, his name, I had a blank, was Abba Kovner. I should not have forgotten him. He was the legendary leader of the Vilna. And the Irish poet I couldn't remember was Seamus Heaney. And he just wouldn't take sides. He just says, I write as I feel and as I must, and I feel very much the same. Another place. What I will need are my glasses.
Would you like mine?
That'll do. Thank you very much.
They're times 3.
An old man silent on a silent hillside where 6 million grow because 6 million died. Under low skies, burdened with grief, dug their own grave, laid their own wreath. Star upon yellow star, stare upon stare, only a bullet to answer a prayer. 6 million trees in 6,000 rows, because 6 million died, 6 million grow, which is very much how I feel about Israel.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you so much to our panel. That was really, really genuinely fascinating.